Every painting tells a story, but some paintings scream. They don't whisper their secrets through clever symbolism or hide their meaning behind fancy metaphors. Instead, they grab you by the shoulders and force you to feel everything the artist was going through when they picked up that brush. What you're about to see aren't just paintings, they're confessions. Raw, unfiltered glimpses into the human soul at its most vulnerable moments. And once you understand what these artists were really saying, you'll realize that some of the most beautiful art comes from the ugliest emotions. Let's start with what looks like a simple religious scene but is actually a brutal takedown of human stupidity. Bruegel painted this masterpiece in 1568, just 1 year before his death, and you can feel the bitterness dripping from every brushstroke. 6 blind men stumble across the canvas in a chain reaction of disaster. The leader has already fallen into a ditch, and because they're all connected by their walking sticks, he's about to drag everyone else down with him. But here's what makes this painting genius. Bruegel didn't just paint generic blind guys. Each man has a different eye condition, from corneal damage to completely missing eyes. The artist literally studied real medical conditions to make this as accurate as possible. The message? It's right there in the Bible verse that inspired it. If the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. Bruegel was painting during some seriously dark times in Europe. The Spanish were cracking down on Protestants, mass executions were happening, and society was basically falling apart. What's really heartbreaking is how the men tilt their heads upward, using their other senses to navigate a world they can't see. But if you think religious allegory is heavy, wait until you see what happens when an artist decides to paint their own mental breakdown. Frida Kahlo basically invented the concept of oversharing through art, and this 1938 painting is her masterpiece of emotional exposure. Imagine you're looking down at your own legs in a bathtub, but instead of just water, you are floating in a soup of memories, nightmares, and trauma. That's exactly what Kahlo painted. Her feet emerge from gray bath water, and floating around them are fragments of her life. A dead bird, a skeleton, 2 women falling in love, her parents, and most disturbing of all, a woman being strangled by a rope held by a faceless man on a tiny island. The painting is basically Kahlo's autobiography told through symbolism. The volcano erupting a skyscraper? That's her explosive emotions about Mexico's relationship with modernity. The bleeding crack between her toes? That's her actual physical pain from the dozens of surgeries she's endured. The empty Mexican dress floating in the water? That's her cultural identity, separate from her broken body. Kahlo once said, "I drank to drown my pain, but the damned pain learned how to swim." This painting is that quote made visual. She's literally drowning in her own memories and trauma, but she's also the observer, looking down at her own suffering with brutal honesty. Speaking of artists who refused to sugarcoat reality, let's talk about a painter who turned a magic trick into a lesson about human gullibility. This painting from around 1502 is basically the medieval version of those videos where people get pickpocketed while watching street magic. Bosch shows us a crowd gathered around a conjurer performing the classic cups and balls trick. But while everyone's focused on the show, they're missing the real crime happening right behind them. The main victim, a well-dressed guy in the center, is so mesmerized by the pearl in the conjurer's hand that he doesn't notice someone stealing his money bag. The message is crystal clear. When you stop thinking critically, you become an easy target. But Bosch wasn't just painting a random crime scene. Those frogs jumping out of the victim's mouth? In medieval symbolism, that meant someone had completely lost their reason and given in to their basest instincts. The owl in the conjurer's basket represents the trickster's intelligence. He's the only one who really understands what's happening. Bosch was painting this during a time when new ideas about science and religion were challenging everything people thought they knew. The painting is a warning. In a world full of deception, the people who stop questioning reality become victims. But if you think getting robbed during a magic show is depressing, our next painting takes human suffering to an entirely different level. Imagine the most depressing motivational poster ever created, and you've got Watts's Hope from 1886. A blindfolded woman sits alone on a small globe, playing a broken lyre with only one string left. Above her, a single tiny star shines in an otherwise empty sky. This isn't your grandmother's inspiring hope poster. Watts painted this painting during the Long Depression of the 1870s, when Britain's economy was tanking and people were starting to question whether progress was even real. He wanted to show hope not as this bright, cheerful emotion, but as something fragile and desperate. The broken lyre is genius symbolism. Musical instruments had been used in art for centuries, but never to represent hope. Watts basically said, what if hope isn't about having everything you need, but about making music with whatever's left? The woman strains to hear the tiny sound from her one remaining string, which perfectly captures how hope feels when you're at rock bottom. Critics hated it at first, calling it ghastly and apocalyptic. But the painting struck a nerve with ordinary people who were struggling. Soon, cheap prints were everywhere. Theodore Roosevelt hung a copy in his home. And decades later, a young Barack Obama heard a sermon based on this painting that inspired his Audacity of Hope campaign theme. Watts made hope blind because, as he said, she's expecting nothing. But that single star above her head suggests that maybe, just maybe, there's still something worth reaching for. Which brings us to our most emotionally devastating entry. Hugues Merle's 1871 painting shows a young woman sitting alone, cradling what appears to be a baby. But look closer, it's not a baby at all. It's a carved wooden log dressed in a red bonnet. Her eyes are what destroy you. They're filled with such raw grief and madness that viewers still comment about being haunted by them 150 years later. This isn't just a painting about mental illness. It's a portrait of loss so profound that reality itself becomes unbearable. Merle painted this right after France's devastating defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. Many scholars think the woman represents France itself, mourning the loss of territory and national identity. The wooden baby she protects so fiercely could symbolize everything the country lost. Its children, its future, its hope. But the personal interpretation is just as powerful. This could be a woman who lost her child and created a replacement to cope with unbearable grief. In the 1870s, women dealing with mental health issues were often dismissed as hysterical and locked away. Merle painted her with dignity and sympathy, showing her pain as real and valid. The red bonnet on the wooden baby echoes revolutionary symbolism, suggesting that even in madness, there's a spark of defiance. She may have lost everything, but she's still fighting to protect what little remains. Which of these paintings hit you the hardest? Drop a comment below and tell me if you've ever seen a piece of art that completely changed how you see the world. And if you're one of those people who thought classical art was boring, well, I hope I just proved you wrong. If you want more stories about the secrets hiding behind famous masterpieces, make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell icon because we're just getting started.